Well, and it's not just, I want to go back to the point that you mentioned earlier with the things that, the work that you're doing in clinical trials, because you are not just simply providing a software solution and, you know, handing that off to radiologists. You're pretty active, pretty aggressive with supporting clinical trials. Could you talk a little bit more about some of the services or support that you provide?
Yeah, and so again, because our focus is in depth in pulmonary care, we can also apply these predictive and precise biomarkers for the evaluation of new therapeutics. So in a clinical trial setting, and I'll kind of focus more on pharmaceutical trials, but it would also apply to device trials, we can help that sponsor, that pharmaceutical company, better select the type of patients for that trial, and we can have a quality controlled way of providing a precision endpoint. So again, if you compare what we can do with CT as using a precision endpoint, and you compare that to, say, a pulmonary function test, you can get a signal or a response with that outcome measure, and sometimes with 95% fewer patients or fewer subjects in that trial. So in an earlier phase trial, you can determine whether that compound, whether or not it's going to work, an earlier go, no go decision. But over the course of that trial, you can reduce the time, you can reduce the number of subjects in the trial, and therefore reduce the cost of that trial tremendously. And one of the probably not so well-known things about clinical trials is the respiratory trial, because the current endpoints they're using are so subjective and so variable. They're one of the most expensive and have the longest timelines to get that drug to market. And that's a very big problem for the respiratory drugs. So we look to use precision endpoints, and reduce that timeline, and therefore reduce the cost to get that pharmaceutical to market.
Really impressive, exciting.
And once they are to market, we can then use those clinical measures to determine that therapy when the patient should get it, because we know what the unique biomarkers are for response. So we know when that drug is available for patient use, for clinical use. We now have an underlying CT-based biomarkers to determine what subtype of patients are going to respond to that drug and which won't. The number one asthma drug on the market only has 11% response. So of all the patients with asthma, you get an asthma drug, and there's 1 in 10 respond. Well, that's not good. We want to find those 11% of the patients that will respond and give them that drug, not have to worry about giving the wrong drug to the 89 patients that wouldn't respond. So that's the idea of working within clinical trials. It's not two independent businesses. One leads to the validation of the other.
Wow. I didn't know that. 11%. Holy cow.
Isn't that something? I mean, it's Eric Topol's book on deep medicine. It's like the first chapter. And it's even for those of us that, like you and I, are been in this business, I read it and I was like, really? 11%? That's amazing.
Huh.